Hello, I'm Liz Brassaw, the Chief Flight Instructor of Thrust Flight. Today I'm interviewing Kathryn Vinclaire, the producer of the documentary Women at 36,000 Feet.
My name's Kathryn Vinclaire. I'm the founder and executive producer at Flight Path Productions. I am not a pilot yet, but I fully intend to be one day. And I'm just a big aviation nerd that has also found the time to start a company with the hopes to making a documentary all about women in aviation.
Excellent. I was going to say, aren't we all a little bit of an aviation nerd?
Yes.
So for, I guess, those of our viewers that might not know me, I'm Liz Brassaw. I'm the Chief Flight Operations Officer at Thrust Flight. Basically, that's the fancy way of saying I'm the chief pilot. So I oversee all the instructors, all training that occurs, ground flight, simulator, and help make sure that the technical side, the flight operations side of our business runs smoothly. I've been doing that role for a couple of years here at Thrust Flight, and I really enjoy it. I am located in Dallas, Texas. That's where the school I work at is. And I've got 3 children of my own. What else can I tell you? I'm a flight instructor instrument, and a multi-engine instructor. And I'm pretty excited about the project you're working on, Kathryn. This looks like it's right up my alley here.
Thank you.
So why don't you tell us? Yeah, why don't you tell us a little bit about the documentary and what you hope to kind of portray in it?
Absolutely. Well, this production has been quite a long time coming. I set up Flight Path Productions last year with the full intention of having a production company that could serve this specific documentary. So it could be independently produced and we wouldn't need to rely on getting commissioned anywhere, and we could just make it on our own terms. As a young woman who wants to go into the aviation industry, I'd like to get a pilot's license. I'd like to maybe become a flight instructor one day. I started looking into opportunities for women, opportunities for anyone in the aviation world in terms of employment. And I just came across two things that really stood out to me. Firstly, you've got these quite public media campaigns to do with women in aviation that are usually being created by big international airlines, and they're these big, glossy, glamorous productions that really show off women in all areas of aviation, including piloting. And it's really inspirational, it's really exciting, it makes you think, yes, I can do this. But then I also found, the more I looked into it, all of these articles talking about how low the percentage of women in aviation actually is, both in pilots and within the industry overall. I come from a filmmaking background. My degree is in film production and cinematography, and I'd previously been working in the film industry in various roles. And that's largely a male-dominated industry, especially in the more technical roles like camera crew, which is where I was primarily based. So I was very used to being in that sort of male-dominated space and being one of the only women on a set, for example. So the idea was not very new to me, but I was also really surprised to see it in the aviation industry because women have been flying for over 100 years. Like, I have a Barbie doll of Amelia Earhart that sits on my desk. Like, there are these icons of female aviation that kind of give the impression that it's all solved, that women have their place in history in the aviation world. And you've got these modern day commercials that are being run by airlines talking about how they're really empowering women to step into the cockpit. So then I was thinking, well, that's a contradiction, because you've got a really positive, engaging, sort of public-facing outlook on women entering aviation in various ways. But then when you look at the actual statistics, they're really low, and they don't appear to have changed a great deal over the last 50 years. So I thought that in itself is fascinating, and I want to try and understand why that is and see what's being done about it. Primarily for personal gain. I like the idea of, being able to learn what's being done so I know where to move to in my own career. But I also think as a filmmaker, it's a fascinating question to ask of why are the stats so low and why is representation still so low across the board?
Sure. Yeah, well, and that's a tough question, I think, right from the beginning, because at least from my perspective, right, and path, it's not obstacles that stop me, right? And so it's trying to connect with these other women around me and see what was the difference. Why did this draw me to it? Why did I continue to pursue it, right? And is there something that you thought, was preventing you from doing it, or that the idea never occurred, right? Maybe it's exposure. So yeah, I think it's a really interesting question, especially from a person in my perspective, right? It's, well, clearly those obstacles didn't stop me. So what's the difference? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've had very varying responses from everybody that we've spoken to, and we're not just speaking to female pilots, we're speaking to male pilots, we're speaking to male professionals within the industry as much as women, because this isn't just a question of how women feel about this issue. It's how are we just as a society responding to the imbalance, and what role can everybody play, regardless of gender, to help balance the scales. And you're right, there are so many people in the industry that have not had particular obstacles related to gender. So to some people, it's a bit of a mystery. And I think that makes it all the more intriguing.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So what stage is the documentary in currently?
Oh, well, we're at such an exciting stage because we're just about to launch our second crowdfunding campaign. So we've been in pre-production for over a year, and that has been largely hidden from the general public because it's just been a case of our teams sort of getting together over Zoom once every couple months and going off and doing another load of research and another series of interviews over Zoom and figuring out as much as we can about this question. And it's a very complex topic, and there's been an awful lot to research and try and discover. So now we're at the stage where we've got pilots and flight schools and aviation groups around the world who are inviting us to come and film with them, but they're not based in the UK, and we need a budget with which to go out and actually get our crew together and get everyone on planes and get B crews in different countries so that we can go out and actually have these face-to-face conversations with these groups and individuals. So we're just about to launch our crowdfunder, which will last for between 2 to 3 months, and we're kicking that off at the end of April 2022. So just a few weeks away. It's a really exciting, slightly intimidating time.
Absolutely. Where do you feel like most of the outreach has come from for those that do want to, they've been reaching out about interviews? Is it mostly in the United States, or is there a particular country that stands out with more interested parties?
That's such a good question. Well, we've been directly contacting a lot of people. The majority of our research has not come from people contacting us. It's come from us reaching out to people and saying, hey, we're making this. Can you help us answer these questions?
Yeah.
We did find that the majority of the studies that we could find into women in aviation are usually based in the US, because you've got a huge aviation industry in the US. And I think a lot of people travel to the US to do their training as well. And also I think there's a lot to be said for Western culture getting a real prominence in mainstream media in general. So we've actually had to go out of our way to find research for other countries and other demographics specifically. It sort of feels like the sort of automatic responses almost are coming from English-speaking countries. So it'll be the US and Canada and the UK, Australia, that sort of thing. We have got an email address on our website that people can use to get in touch with us. They can get in touch at production@flightpathproductions.com. That has been an open email that's been live for the last year, and we've had many emails now being sent through to us, and they're usually from pilots who are in slightly more isolated countries, or countries where there isn't such a sort of famous history of aviation. I think America has a lot to be grateful for in terms of its proliferation of aviation within films and cinema and TV. But then if you compare that to, say, Kenya or Turkey or other countries that are not necessarily famous for aviation in the way that, say, the US is, it's been fascinating to get these stories. We ask these pilots to share their story with us, and it's wonderful. I'll open my inbox, and amidst all of the Zoom invites and admin, there'll be these jewels of stories that women are sharing with me of how they got into aviation and the challenges that they overcame and the success that they found within it. So it is really diverse, but you just sometimes have to look a little bit deeper to find that diversity.
Right. So for yourself personally, you mentioned that, you started embarking on this path, that you are also considering pilot training or have already decided on it. Mm-hmm. What do you feel like was that initial spark for you that made you even look this direction?
Oh, well, I was many years ago, for a very, very brief period of time, a cadet with the Royal Air Force here in the UK. And the Royal Air Force cadets do absolutely incredible work in providing experiences of flight training and learning about general aviation with a military perspective here in the UK. And it gave me a sort of a very brief taste of the aviation world, and I came away from that knowing that I really was interested in aviation in general, not necessarily being a pilot, but that I just really loved this idea of an industry built around things that could take off the ground and fly. And there's something that felt very magical to my younger self about that. But I was in the middle of my studies, and all of my education in my sort of teenage years had nothing to do with STEM. It was all very focused on humanities and quote unquote soft creative subjects. So at the time, my parents advised me to step away from the cadets because I wasn't really talking about a career in the STEM field at the time. I was considering going into something to do with theatre or cinema or anything like that. So that was it was sort of really short-lived. Because I was only there for a brief period of time before I stopped to focus on my other studies that weren't STEM related. But I think deep down, something still remained within me. I'm one of those people that just gets really excited at airports, even though I'm not even thinking about a career. So let me see, a few years ago now, I think it was 2017, a friend of a friend who is an airline captain and has been for several decades. He had a sort of a shared ownership of an aerobatics plane at a local airfield. He offered to take me up for a flight, and I remember him calling me up before we were set to go, and he said, "Are you an adrenaline junkie? Do you like roller coasters, that sort of thing?" I'm terrified of roller coasters. I don't go to theme parks because I feel scared. But I lied and I said, yes, I love them. I can't get enough. I'm such an adrenaline junkie, because I thought I want him to give me the most extreme experience possible so I can see where I clock out or how I feel about it. So we went up and we were doing barrel rolls and flying upside down and sort of stalling and just all these little tricks, and I couldn't stop smiling and whooping and cheering and laughing. It was the most exhilarating flight I've ever experienced, and I just came back from that thinking I think I need to fly in some capacity for a living, and I don't know what that means. I don't even know what's available to me, but I just know that it has to be involving flight in some capacity. So that's sort of where I'm at now. I'm just riding on that passion.
Sure. That's my favorite part of it. I get to work with individuals like yourself all day, right? That's my full-time job, is to teach people how to fly. And so when they come in, and we call it, you've been bit by the bug, the aviation bug, right? That it's like, it's in your blood now, right? It's like, I've got this interest, this draw, and it's impossible to turn away from it, right? That it's so entrapping is not a word, but that's what I want to say. It's just so involved, right? You just are overpowered by it. When an airplane flies overhead, right, that you turn and you look, or like you said, you're going on a normal flight at the airport and you're excited to go, and everyone's like, why would you be excited? You've got the security lines and you can't take liquids, and right, and you just can't even explain. So that's awesome to hear that's the stage you're in, and it's so much fun. It never fades, I'll tell you that.
Yes, no, totally. I think, it's definitely a bug, because I think it's not a case of logically thinking, okay, this is what I need in my life. I don't think that side of your brain has very much to do with that feeling. I think it's literally just a case of, oh, I need this now. It doesn't matter how it's going to happen. I don't know how that's going to work out, but I just know that it needs to be a part of my life and my experiences.
Right. That's an excellent way to describe it. I can definitely relate. So we've talked a little bit about the documentary and what stage you're in. What is your main mission that you're trying to accomplish with it? Or what do you feel like is your biggest dream for this documentary?
Oh, wow. Well, I see there are a few things that I want to try and encapsulate with this production. Obviously, I want people to go away inspired. I love the idea of making a documentary that is being created not specifically to appeal to an aviation-related audience. I'd like it to be universal. I'd like to find a way of being able to make it interesting for people who know nothing about aviation and haven't got the aviation bug and are not considering careers in perhaps a STEM field, so that maybe they can watch it and get that bug through watching the production and having that exposure to this industry they might not have previously considered. I love the idea of breaking down the sort of slight taboo, which depending on some people is very prominent, and to others it doesn't exist at all. It really depends who you ask. To do with discussing women in aviation just as a topic, as a theme. I think there's a real spectrum of conversation when it comes to people's opinions on women in aviation. It's not really a question of whether people think women should fly or not. The majority clearly do. It's more a question of, do you think the inequality is going to be solved by having conversations specifically about women in aviation and bringing out all of your labels and all of your boxes and sort of assigning demographics based on gender to pilots? Or is that going to be solved by trying to eliminate the idea of gender altogether? And there are pros and cons to both approaches, I think. And I'd love the idea of this documentary inspiring discussion around how we approach trying to improve things in the future from quite a multifaceted perspective, because there is no one singular right way to do this. If I've learned anything from the research, it's that everyone's got a different approach and a different opinion. So there needs to be, presumably, multiple ways in which we tackle these problems and this inequality, because it's different from country to country, generation to generation, certainly. You asked what my sort of dream for the documentary is. This is a bit of a weird one. Ultimately, I want it to become irrelevant. I love the idea that maybe in 5, 10, 20 years' time, however long it takes, that this documentary will no longer really have very much prominence as anything other than a timepiece to encapsulate where the world was in 2022, just at the end of COVID, when the aviation industry had been really shook up and had a chance to rewrite some of the ways it approaches things moving forward. But the sooner this becomes irrelevant, the sooner there will be proof of substantial change within the industry. And we're at that apex now. We're just at that tipping point. So I'm really curious to see how quickly it loses its relevancy, so that gender doesn't have to be such an issue anymore.
Sure. Well, I think if there's any industry that could do it, it would be aviation. This industry changes extremely rapidly in some ways. In some ways, it's on par with other industries, right? But so you've gone and interviewed women, and you said all sorts of I'm going to call them individuals, right? We've got female aviators, we've got other females involved in the aviation industry. You said you've also interviewed male pilots, and are really trying to get, I think, a whole picture. What's been one of the most surprising things you've taken away from conducting these interviews?
I think the most surprising thing has been the number of women that have wanted to speak to me off the record. They want me to turn off the microphone, stop recording, but they still want to have a conversation and share their story. This usually comes from women who've had a more negative experience, where their gender has affected their career, where they believe that they have experienced sexism and struggles based purely on the fact that they are female. And this is where it gets really tricky, I think, because of course we want to only speak positively about women in aviation, and we want to just only have good, inspiring stories to tell, because we don't want anyone to feel discouraged, because the industry wants to welcome women, it wants to welcome everybody. And the majority of people in the industry, whether they're pilots or whether they're in the business side of things, are welcoming that change. But it has been shocking to me as a relatively privileged middle-class white woman from the UK to hear women from all around the world say, okay, I'm going to tell you something, but I don't want this to have my name attached to this story, because I don't want to be labeled as someone who's trying to stir things up. I don't want to be known for being difficult or contrary. And they say they don't want it to affect their careers as well. And that's been really surprising, because I thought that was something that I might have found if I'd made this documentary in like the 1960s or something. Not in 2022. That's really surprised me. But I will stress that is the minority of cases by far. Most people that I speak to have just beautiful, inspiring stories to share. So for our production, really, it's a case of how do we address those more negative experiences and give them the time and the space that they deserve, because they shouldn't go unheard. But we also don't want people to feel that that's what they should expect, or that's what they can expect from the industry as a woman going into it, because times are changing, things are very progressive. We live in a very equal world in many respects. So we want people to feel positive about it, despite these slightly more challenging stories as well.
Sure. Yeah. So through conducting those interviews, do you feel like there's been a theme from those women that did choose this career path, or did move down the road of becoming a pilot, right? Or a character trait that they shared?
They're all pretty tenacious, I will say, because I think even the most privileged of pilots still has substantial challenges to overcome, regardless of gender or demographic or anything like that, because it's a challenging career. I think a lot of the women in this industry, heck, I think a lot of the people in this industry, regardless of gender, really feel inspired by the challenging nature of the training and the work. I think it might take a certain type of person when it comes to how you deal with challenges. A question of, do you sort of curl up and say, okay, maybe this isn't for me, or do you want to become a problem solver? I've heard a lot of pilots talk about how they feel that the best pilot would be someone who is a really good problem solver. You can throw anything at them and they will have become so symbiotic with the aircraft that they're piloting that they'll be able to find a way around it. And I think that rings true across every country where we've been in contact with pilots. They just want to be the best pilot they can and find the finest ways of solving all the complications and challenges that can come with the career.
Yeah, how interesting. And how could that not bleed into their personal life, right? If they're trying to become this best pilot who solves problems and handles emergencies as they arise, right? That of course that's how now they would handle their own personal life, right? Is problem solving and thinking on the fly, right?
Yeah,
Excellent.
totally. And there's no set route to becoming a pilot, because we can't all take out second mortgages on our homes to go finance our ATPLs and have 3 years of training and start at an airline. That would seem to be the given route. And I think for a lot of people who perhaps aren't as familiar with the diversity within the industry, I think a lot of people can stall themselves unintentionally by thinking that's the only way to approach working in the industry. But there's so much more to it, and it doesn't really matter where you want to end up in the industry. You're going to have to find your own path to getting there. So the challenges that people face are going to be unique to them in many situations as well, because everyone's got their own path to forge.
Definitely. When I feel like you just really identified our female student population here at Thrust Flight.
Really?
They often are the ones that have to work it around other obligations in life, that they can't go do this, like you said, 2 or 3 year full-time commitment program. We do have women in those programs, but often, right, I train mothers that still have obligations with children, or individuals that quitting their job is not an option, and so now they're balancing the education and the work piece, right? And of course I've got students in both camps and all genders, right? But I do find that with the female population specifically, that does seem to be a trend, on a challenge they face, and an obstacle, I guess, on pursuing it on the quick path, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Do you find that you have fathers who you're training who say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm really struggling to fit this in with my parenting schedule"?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, largely they are also working full time, right? And so they're coming after a job at 5 or 6 p.m., right? And I have had personally multiple calls like that where they say, well, it's the kids' soccer night, or mom's got to go to this, so I've got to help out with the children tonight. Obviously, it's a more common call from the female students. The sitter canceled, things like that. But we definitely do get it from fathers as well, and have quite a few fathers, I think, training with us now. So
yeah. No, that's awesome. I mean, it's nice to hear that, that men are picking up the share of parenting as well. And I think it's an important reminder, especially when we're having so many talks about gendered conversation. I think it's so important to just remind everyone that, that the guys still have to work at being dads too. And that's still a very full-time commitment.
Definitely. It's a shared, responsibility.
Yeah, totally. Do you know roughly, percentage-wise, how many female students you have in your flight school at the moment?
I do, yeah. We actually have, I would call it a pretty technology forward school. So we have a database we manage with our students. I looked it up today. We actually have about 12% of our students are female, which I was surprised it was not higher, because I feel like I see women all over the halls, right? All over at the campus here at the school. But I still think that's a pretty good number, considering, when you look at the numbers of how many licensed pilots there are in the United States, it's about 6%. And so to be double that in our training is a great place to start, right?
Oh, totally. No, I think it's a really strong statistic, especially compared to some of the other ones I've heard over the last year. It really does vary. I mean, you've got multiple certified flight instructors who are female at your flight school. Do you feel that is something that is a benefit to female students?
I do, yeah. I think that's in large part why we're able to attract such a large female training base, large being, a relative term here. But when you've got an instructor who looks like you and who worries about the same things as you, right, it's a lot more realistic to think, I don't have to stop at the first step, I can go all the way through, right? And they don't necessarily meet those instructors before they start training, but once they're in it, I do think it helps keep them through till the end. right? Rather than I'm going to stop at this initial step, or I'll just do this as a hobby instead of a career. The other piece is one of the biggest recruiters we have for female and minority students is the word of mouth or referral. And so once we have started training, or we've got employees that fit those demographics working for us, right, that they talk to their friends who often are still in those minority demographics, which then only brings more to the school. For example, we've hosted multiple events with the National Gay Pilots Association here in the United States, and have really been able to increase students we train from that demographic. The same, I've got a lot of flight attendants who are making the conversion to becoming a pilot. They talk about, getting on the other side of the cockpit door. And I think most of those come from referrals. The first flight attendant we trained shared it with other flight attendants she was working with, because that's also a very large female population. And we've trained male flight attendants as well, but they're in the minority in their industry, right? So that's been a really neat thing for us, is to see those students complete their training and find the welcoming place that they want to invite others that are also interested in the same path.
Yeah, it's a very social industry, I think, because the amount of training you have to do is so often shared with another group, because you can study it entirely independently, but most people don't. Most people will go to a flight school, they'll be in a class, there'll be a sort of group mentality. And even if it's just you training with a flight instructor, you develop a strong working relationship with that instructor, because you've got to have each other's backs when you're in that cockpit scenario and you're training. So that sort of idea of people finding referrals through friendships and connections, I think just rings really true for the industry overall, because
definitely,
because it's so social.
We talk about how small the industry is all the time, not to mean that there's not a lot of people in it, but that the connections are wide spanning, right? If you know one pilot here, then he knows another and she knows another, and before you know it, you've got connections across the industry in many countries. So like you said, that can be friendship or community, many words to be able to describe it.
Yeah, no, 100%. We had a moment like that a couple of weeks ago. We went to our first live sort of in-person meetup with the Women in Aviation and Aerospace Charter here in the UK. They had a meetup at the Department for Transport in central London, and there were about 100 different people in this room, all industry professionals working for companies like Rolls-Royce and EasyJet and Amazon Air, etc. All coming together on International Women's Day to discuss the role of women in aviation. So of course we had to be there. And we bumped into a young pilot who is an ambassador for that chapter. And she already had an interview with us scheduled for later in the week. We didn't know she was going to be at that event, and we just turned up and not expecting to find anyone that we already knew. But then just through sheer chance, and like you say, the industry being quite small, lo and behold, there was someone there that we already knew and had already booked an interview with. It's crazy.
Yes. And those stories I know will only continue as you get deeper in the industry. It's very common.
Yes. I'm really curious to ask about your role in particular, because as Chief Flight Operations Manager, I hope I get that right, you're sort of straddling the line between being a pilot, but also being related to the sort of business side, in that you are very much a part of your flight school and the sort of managerial side of helping run and organize things within the flight school and with all the other flight instructors. So you're kind of at this sort of apex between pilots and aviation business. What do you feel what do you feel is sort of the most significant contributor to your experience in the business side, coming at it from a sort of piloting perspective?
Sure. I mean, I think that's one of the most powerful tools I have when meeting with other managers, and especially trying to craft our business, right? Is that I can talk the talk, right? I can speak the technical language and can relate directly with those we're either trying to recruit or trying to manage. And it garnishes a lot of respect with those that I supervise, right? Is they know that I have worked their job, and that I am relevant in the specifics of what they're trying to accomplish. So it's, like I said, it's been a really powerful tool in the position I hold. And hopefully I can be a good example of it, back as you look down through the hierarchies there. But
Absolutely.
it's been quite exciting for me to learn the business side, because I went through pilot education, right? That's what I learned to do, is how to fly, not how to run a business. So that selfishly, right, has been a very fulfilling part of my position, is the constant education, right? That I'm still learning on the pilot side. I don't think you ever finish that completely. No. And now to be able to grow on this other side with business skills and management.
That's really awesome. I love that they go hand in hand. It makes sense that they would, but it's lovely to hear it reiterated, because I think a lot of pilots are curious about the business side of aviation. And there are certainly a lot of pilots who become presidents of the Woman in Aviation International chapters around the world, or the 99s, or other associations, because there is a sort of entrepreneurial business admin sort of spirit, I think, that lives in many of the women who want to go into aviation.
Sure.
It's really interesting to see how they cross. We've spoken to a lot of pilots who do all sorts of things alongside their piloting. Not everyone that we speak to is a full-time pilot. They might have their own business that they run, and then they fly alongside that. I think the ways in which aviation integrates itself into different people's lifestyles is really fascinating, because it's just so diverse. It can take up as much or as little of your life as you want it to, really.
Yeah, very true. It could be everything from career to hobby to family outings, right? Or it could just be one of those pieces.
Yeah, totally. Just off the back of you learning so much and being such a presence in the business side of things as much as the piloting side, how do you feel that your presence within the company, within that business structure, impacts opportunities and experiences for prospective female students at your flight school?
Sure. I mean, it gives me a unique opportunity for increasing exposure. For example, the children in my neighborhood and the individuals I go to church with, right? I can expose them to it. I can bring them to my school and show them simulators and let them fly them, right? And show them aircraft. And the fact that I'm doing it, right? How I look and my age and my gender, all of that is part of the experience. The other piece is that when students come, right, often they come with their parents. And I am not who they were expecting to meet with, right? So sometimes it's a bit of a surprise. And for some, I think that's quite encouraging, of like, yes, this is exactly what I'm looking for. And for others to say, I had no idea. And that will be a piece of conversation with others they meet, right? Even if that was not the role model they needed, right? To believe that they could do this, it will be a piece of conversation later. And so, like I said, I think that gives me a lot of influence. So hopefully I am something worthwhile to be influential. That's what I strive for in my position, and as I interact with those individuals I meet.
Yeah, no, I'm sure it has a really positive impact. It's one of those things that's quite difficult to track. I mean, we've found this in our research as well. As much as you can boil things down to statistics, what we're actually talking about when we're talking about change within the industry, it's more of a cultural change. Mm-hmm. And that's a really intangible thing. It's a difficult thing to define. It's difficult to have really specific examples where you've ruled out any other impacting factors. So I think it's quite common, I find, for women in this industry to perhaps not even realize the impact that they are having just by being there. They don't necessarily need to become figureheads for a movement. to be impactful, because just their presence is enough, I think. And so many of the pilots that I've spoken to who have just started their training have had stories about seeing a woman in the cockpit, or seeing a woman in a film flying a plane, or meeting with somebody who's doing training and is female. And that just being enough to kind of reassure them, I think, that they're doing the right thing in going into that field that I think for some people can be quite intimidating, because it's just another male-dominated space. It's not especially feminine friendly.
Sure.
It can certainly, it's got some stereotypes that I think don't really do it justice. I think they're a little outdated. In terms of like the boys club that some people think the aviation industry is, and that really varies based on who you talk to and what company you're with and where you are in the world and all these other factors. But it's nice that people can look past that stereotype and discover it for themselves and actually find how welcoming it can be and the inclusivity that you can find all over the world.
Yeah, absolutely. We all have a sphere of influence, right? And like you said, them just being able to be an example in their sphere, just being in the industry, right? It does, like you said, doesn't have to rise through the ranks.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Speaking of rising through the ranks, your company is partnered with several airlines. What's your take on their outlook when it comes to hiring women pilots specifically? Is it something that they're looking to address? Have they ever had conversations with you to that effect?
Absolutely. Yeah. So we're partnered with a number of airlines, as you mentioned, and we do have conversations fairly frequently with them about what they're looking for in applicants, so that's what we're creating here as a school, right?
Sure.
Many of them have, in the last year, told us how committed they are to hiring female-specific aviators and minorities across the board. A couple of them have even made commitments to hire 50% minorities and female pilots for their future classes. Yeah, which is a huge goal, right?
50%.
And for us, that means, we've got to attract more so that there's 50% to hire from. But yeah, and that's not even just one airline, it's multiples that have made commitments like that. So across the board, we're seeing a lot more conversation about it, and much more serious commitment to let's try and include those individuals in our hiring, and females are a large part of that.
Wow. I mean, that's so encouraging to hear, but 50%, I'm really surprised at that. That's amazing.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah, great goal, isn't it?
Yeah, no, totally. It's ambitious. And I mean, I'm wondering, you mentioned that in like the last year, these companies have specifically set these targets. Do you think that's related to COVID at all? I'm unsure currently as to just how much it's affected certain areas of the industry.
Sure. Hiring has definitely been greatly affected by COVID for the airlines specifically. Other career paths have also been quite affected. It all kind of trickles down if the large airlines, the largest employers of pilots, gets affected, right? So in all, in the aviation industry, hiring is like a mad frenzy right now. You could get hired at any airline that you're looking to get hired to once you meet the qualifications, essentially. And that's awesome, for myself, as we're training pilots and we need somewhere for those pilots to end up, and that it looks like a really optimistic future when you're starting in the industry here. And it is truly. Anyways, so I think because of that, because there's such a great need, which is directly related to how many pilots took early retirements, went on leave and decided not to come back from leave during the pandemic, right? Because obviously international travel and domestic travel really decreased during that time. And they stopped training new pilots during the pandemic. And so right now it's the catch-up game, right? It's like we couldn't train enough pilots to fill the seats if we wanted to, right? Because we need simulators, we need instructors. Anyway, so like I said, It's been greatly affected, and I think they see a need to increase recruitments overall, and the great way to do that is by targeting the underrepresented demographics in their industries, right? So to say, bring female pilots, right? Bring minority pilots, bring the traditional candidates, but that we're going to increase our outreach to all, so that hopefully we get more recruits in total, because the hiring need is that great. So,
I mean, that's awesome to hear. Whilst this documentary is focused on women in aviation, there's so much to be said for minority demographics being underrepresented across the board. And it's just very encouraging to hear that there is also a push for just inclusivity in every possible way, really. So it's not just a case of female focused, because I think a lot of the media attention is focused on representation of females within the industry. And that is amazing, and we fully champion that, of course. But at the same time, it shouldn't be outweighing the need for minority demographics in general to be making up any deficit that there currently is in the industry. So hopefully in the future, we'll start to see the pendulum swing more in that direction, because of these conscious efforts that are being made by airlines and other companies.
Yeah, absolutely. I hope so.
Yeah, amazing. Oh, goodness me. I always get to a stage in any of these conversations when we've been talking about big themes and change and everything else, where it's all really interesting, but I just want to know a bit more of your story.
Sure, yeah. So I mentioned a few of my credentials earlier, right? And aviation's notorious for just using acronyms, right? CFI, yeah. CFII, MEI. So I mentioned I'm an instructor. I've been an instructor for, let's see, I have to do the math really quick. I think about 8 years now. And I've truly loved it. It's a little bit of an untraditional path. Most pilots in my position would move on to the airlines, right? But I really enjoyed the teaching aspect. I've got a couple of kiddos at home, 3 children here, and they're all very young. My oldest is in kindergarten, right? So we are in the toddler and the baby stages. Originally I trained in Utah, which is a very mountainous state, and moved out to Texas. And so that's really helped broaden my skills as a pilot and my exposure to it. At Thrust Flight here, I've been here for the last 5 years. So I instructed at a school previously and moved here to Thrust Flight as an instructor, and then got promoted to the assistant chief flight instructor and then the chief flight instructor, and then I've moved into my current position, right? So I technically still hold the role of chief flight instructor, just have a few more business duties beyond that. Yeah. So, but I mean, it's truly all I've ever considered doing. So I am living my best life, like they say online, right? Or I'm truly living my dreams, because it's all I've ever dreamed of doing is flying airplanes. I get to do that every single day.
That's absolutely amazing and really inspiring to me as someone with the aviation bug who would love to one day be in a similar position where I get to fly every day and have that as part of my job, my career. That just sounds spectacular. What was it that gave you the aviation bug?
Sure. I couldn't really nail it down. As a small child, it's all I wanted to do. I have no pilots in my family. I don't have friends whose fathers were pilots or anything, so I'm not quite sure where the original idea occurred, but it's something that's always stuck with me. So, as a small child, I think people thought I would grow out of it, right? Whether that's my parents or siblings, right? Mm-hmm. And I didn't continue to want to be a pilot, and that's really the only career path I ever discussed. So when I was 16 years old, still talking about becoming a pilot, right? My dad says, well, we better see if you even like this. I've never even been in a small airplane, and here I am saying I want to be a pilot for a living, right? Yeah. So he finds a flight instructor on Craigslist, the online selling, buying website, who's offering his services as an instructor. So he sets me up with this stranger, right? Which sounds so crazy looking back. I go in the aircraft with him. He lets me sit next to him in the front seats, right? Gives me the controls, lets me fly around a little bit, and I am totally sold. If I had any doubt, it was this is it. I was right.
Yes.
That is, I mean, it was more than I could have ever imagined. Such a pleasurable experience, and it's continued to be that. I mean, I have the best office in the whole world. It's literally the sky, you know?
That's like the coolest thing in the world to me. Like, I'm really geeking out now because that's just the best thing. That's the best thing to say. Literally, your office is the sky. Yeah, that's just so cool. Ah, amazing. I mean, you say that you always wanted to be a pilot. Did you have any particular area in the industry that you sort of really wanted to work in? Or was it just a case of, if I'm flying a plane, I'm happy?
Sure. So I think I was drawn to a lot of what we see in movies, right? Or a lot of what initially people think about when they think about aviation, which was aerobatics, you know, Red Bull air race pilots, fighter pilots in the military, just really these high adrenaline, intense flying positions, which is, it sort of fits my personality as you get to know me a bit better. I am the one that looks for roller coasters and, you know, new experiences, no fear of heights, you know, all that kind of stuff. So
wow.
Initially, that's really what I wanted to be. I even went so far as to talked with recruiters for different military agencies to see, you know, how can I fly a fighter jet, and can you guarantee that this is what I would be in the military as a pilot? You know, I don't want to be anything else. So I didn't end up going down that path, but as I got more into it, I actually started flying, right? Because all of this is before I've even started flying.
Sure.
I found that I really do love the teaching aspect, that every day brings a little bit of a different challenge or experience. And having little ones at home, right, is only all the better for being able to be home every night. The airlines never really were like this draw to me. I've looked a lot at air ambulance flying and have done a couple of internships for companies like that, which I just think the satisfaction you get at the end of the day in a job like that is irreplaceable. You know you are truly changing things in the world and for the better, whether it's that individual patient or just the service you offer. So might still be a path I go down. For now, I'm happy where I'm at, but.
Yeah. And did you, when you started working as a flight instructor, did you immediately think, this is something I want to stick out for quite some time? Or did that gradually reveal itself to you?
Sure. Initially, those were probably some of the most surprising experiences I had in aviation. Initially, you know, I'm teaching who can afford flying lessons, which traditionally is middle-aged males, right, that have made it in the business world, now have the money to fly and have always wanted to, right? Yeah. So some of my initial students were quite surprised when who was on the other side of the door, right, to offer their flight training. And so I do think it was a gradual growth, and that's probably a lot of the reason why is it was a learning experience for both me and my students on what does this relationship look like, and how do we find a balance on the authoritative relationship between us, because it truly is breaking the stereotypes in most settings, right? They would be the authoritative position versus me in that relationship. So
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. No, it's really breaking down some stereotypes, and I think it's very empowering and quite a sort of leveling factor that, you know, perhaps people just wouldn't have considered before they were in that position.
Definitely.
Yeah. Oh, that's so lovely. I love that you've mentioned so many different areas of the aviation industry that you considered and have looked into and tried, and are still considering. I think it's one of the most diverse industries out there, and it's just lovely to speak to someone who's willing to embrace all of that diversity of employment as well, because there's just an awful lot more to the aviation world than flying people on holiday.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Yeah. Which is part of what I love so much about it. I mean, it's truly such a ever-changing pursuit, right? Whether it's flying a new aircraft, flying into different weather conditions than you have, or even the time of day, right? Day flying and night flying offers such different challenges and experiences, and the job opportunities only add to that. So like I said, I think I'm still learning how to be a good pilot, and I think that will be a perpetual process because of how many opportunities and different experiences exist. So it's the perfect career path for somebody who likes learning.
Totally. Yeah, no, I think it's one of the big draws that there's always something else you can learn, something else you can get certified in, and yeah, other areas that you can explore. It's just constantly evolving. No, it's wonderful. But that's one of the things really that we just want to highlight in our production as well. It's just diversity, really, within the industry and within the people that make up that industry too, because it's a big, beautiful melting pot, and it's lovely to get to showcase that.
Absolutely.
Amazing.
Well, thank you so much for your time today. This has been a really engaging, interesting conversation for me. I hope it's been for you as well.
I've loved it. I'm feeling really excited. The problem with speaking to someone like yourself who gets me all fired up, it makes me want to go out and fly. And I'm going to an airfield on Sunday, but that's for filming, not for flying. So it's going to be tantalizing to be that close to planes and not be able to go up in them. But thank you. It's been so lovely to discuss everything with you. And your questions were really, really interesting for me to answer as well. It's nice to be the one being interviewed as well. That makes a change.
Thanks for watching today's video. If you have any questions, leave a comment. Subscribe, ring the bell so you don't miss our next video, and we'll see you on the next one.